The last thing I watched from the back of that room was my own work winning a contract with my name nowhere on it. 11 years. That is the part I always have to explain before anything else makes sense. 11 years of the same coffee order, the same shorthand, the same standing joke about the radiator in my first sublet that clanged every morning at exactly 6, and which we named Gerald, like it was a difficult relative we had both learned to live with. We had met in a critique session in our second year of school, which is to say we met at the moment when people are most raw and most honest about their work because they are still too young to be strategic about it. I had liked her immediately. That is the thing about Sera. She was very easy to like. She was a connector. That was the word she used for herself, usually in rooms where people were listening. She moved through introductions the way some people move through crowds. Easy, purposeful, leaving a trail of handshakes and remembered names, and the particular warmth of someone who makes you feel specifically chosen. I was not that. I was the person who needed 3 hours alone before I could say anything worth saying, and for years I told myself that made us complementary. She opened the doors, and I made the things worth walking through them for. What I did not see, the first time, was that she had been cataloging. She knew which pieces were strongest. She had opinions about my palette choices that came back to me later in the exact language I had used to explain them. She had watched every commission go out of my studio with the attention of someone studying rather than visiting, and I had thought that was what friendship looked like. I thought she was interested. She was, just not the way I understood. My phone buzzed at 9:14.
Morning, love. Still on for coffee? I have something I want to run by you before the week starts.
She always led with love, not as warmth, as positioning. A small claim, softly placed, the way you set a hand on something to signal ownership before anyone else notices. I used to think I was reading into it. I had spent a long time convincing myself I was reading into it. I put the phone face down. 60 seconds. Then I picked it up. Sure, I'll come to you. Because the last time I had said yes to coffee, and yes to the photographs, and yes to the favor of walking my portfolio into the Aldrin Group pitch, I had stood at the back of that presentation room 14 months later and watched the contract go to a studio I'd never heard of, with work I had made on every single slide. My name appeared once, in the fine print of the image credits. Reference source. I had spent 3 weeks after that deciding what to do. Then a month. Then the months blurred and I was working and not acting, and the distance between what happened and what I could prove kept feeling like a wall I couldn't climb. That was the first life, not this one. This time I needed to be in her apartment before the copies were made. She had printed them already. I saw the corner of the folder on her kitchen counter the moment she opened the door, and something in me went very still. Not cold, not angry. Still, the way things go still when you know exactly what you are looking at, and you have already decided what to do about it.
You look tired. Did you sleep?
Fine. She made coffee. She talked about the Aldrin Group the way she talked about anything she had already decided to take, with the ease of someone sharing news rather than making a plan. The pitch review was in 3 weeks. She had a relationship with the creative director, a woman named Calloway, who apparently had specific opinions about visual language and very little patience for presentations that looked like everyone else's. This was the pitch that would change things, Sera said. The real one.
That's actually where I was hoping you could help. I'm pulling together the strongest material I have. I was thinking a few of your older pieces, just to set the visual language, establish the register before the newer work comes in. You know how Calloway's eye works.
She said your older pieces, not mine. Hers to use, temporarily, as borrowed context. The phrasing was so clean. I had heard it before and I had said yes, and I would not say yes the same way twice. Which pieces?
The triptych from the Harmon Project, the 2 gradient studies, and those identity sketches, the ones with the triangular negative space. Those are so specific, Mia. Nobody's doing that anymore.
Right. The triangular negative space was where I put my mark. 3 millimeters, bottom left corner of every piece, worked into the geometry, so it read as intentional composition at normal viewing distance. Invisible to someone moving through a presentation at speed. Visible if you pressed your thumb to the corner and looked. I had been doing it since that same second year of school, when a professor, A woman named Delgado, who wore the same gray cardigan every Tuesday and had no patience for hedging, told our cohort, "Put your name in the work before it leaves your hands. Not your signature. Your logic. Make it yours in a way they can't erase and can't claim." She had meant it philosophically. I had taken it literally. Every piece I made after that. Every scan. Every file that went anywhere. The mark was in all of it. Sera had been in my studio hundreds of times. She had watched me work. She had never asked what was in the corners. I was not going to tell her. "I'll send over clean scans this week."
You're a lifesaver. Genuinely. I'll credit you in the internal brief, obviously.
Obviously. I drove home and pulled every scan I owned onto an external drive. High resolution. The mark in every file, exactly where it had always been. I also pulled my student archive, work predating the Harmon project by 4 years, where the same compositional ratio appeared in its earliest form, still rough, still finding itself, but unmistakably the same logic. The origin of it. 9 years of documented development, sitting in folders I had organized by semester and never shown to anyone. Then I sent an email to Calloway's assistant. I asked whether the Aldrin Group was still accepting independent portfolio submissions for the pitch review. I said I had work relevant to their current direction and would appreciate the consideration. The assistant replied in 2 hours. "Yes, submit by end of week." I submitted everything. Student archive first, then the Harmon work, then 3 years of commissions following it, 62 files, clean resolution, dated metadata. The full line of evidence from second-year studio to last Tuesday, continuous and traceable. Then I closed my laptop and did not touch it until morning. The pre-contract review was a Tuesday. I knew the date because Sera had mentioned it twice and then stopped mentioning it entirely, which was a kind of signal I had learned to read only after the fact the first time. People stop talking about the thing they are protecting. I was not supposed to be there. I was there because Calloway's team had reviewed my independent submission, found it relevant, and offered me a separate presentation slot for that same morning, 40 minutes before Sera's. I declined the slot. I asked instead whether I could observe the afternoon session as a prospective vendor who wanted to understand the room's priorities before committing to a full pitch. They said yes without hesitation. I sat in the second row with a notebook I did not write in. Sera walked in and saw me. Her smile tightened for a fraction of a second. Barely, the way ice sounds when it shifts, that small, and then came back wider than it had been before.
I didn't know you'd be here.
I submitted some work. They invited me to observe.
Of course they did.
Calloway ran the review the way people run rooms when they have already formed an opinion and are using the session to confirm it. She moved through Sera's early slides at pace, nodding, making notes, until she hit the triptych. She stopped. She leaned forward. The shift was small, but the room registered it.
"Tell me about this one. Not what it is. Why this? The pull in the negative space. What were you solving for?"
A pause, short, present.
The brand needed something that felt intentional without being rigid. I wanted the eye to move without feeling directed.
"And the ratio? Mapped or arrived at?"
Arrived at mostly instinct.
Wrong. The ratio was not instinct. The ratio was a specific mathematical relationship I had worked out across 2 years and recorded in a process journal that was currently sitting in a box in my closet with coffee stains on the cover from a studio I had rented month to month because I could not afford a lease. The journal had entry dates. It had my handwriting. It had the calculations in the margins in pencil because I had done them by hand until I was certain. Sera had been in that studio many times. She had never asked about the journal. Calloway wrote 1 line in her notebook. Sera's shoulders settled back. She thought she had handled it. I said nothing. I watched Calloway's pen stop moving and thought, 1 more layer. The full portfolio review was a Thursday. The entire internal creative team. 3 walls, every piece in consideration displayed simultaneously. A comparison room, the kind where you do not see work in isolation, but in relation to everything beside it. I was not invited. I did not need to be. My scans were in the room because Sera had borrowed them, But Calloway's team had also included my independent submission as comparative reference for the evaluation, a fact I discovered only when Sera texted me that evening.
Interesting session today. Calloway pulled in some outside reference work. Reminded me of yours, honestly. Strange coincidence.
She thought it was coincidence. She thought she was watching something appear from a distance without understanding she was watching herself get surrounded. The next morning, a junior designer named Penn sent me an email. He had seen my independent submission in the intake pile, and he had been in the Thursday room when the walls went up, and he had put those two things together in a way that made him uncomfortable enough to write to a stranger. He wrote, "I don't know if you're aware, but there's a portfolio in this review with the same compositional signature as your work. I don't mean similar. I mean the same. I thought you should know." I wrote back, "Thank you. I know." He wrote, "Is there anything I can do?" I thought about that for a long time. Not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to be precise. I wrote, "Come to the formal presentation on Friday. That's all I need." The formal presentation was in Aldrin's main conference room. Glass walls on 3 sides, 12 chairs, 2 brand representatives, a legal advisor, Calloway's full team, and 3 vendors presenting in sequence. I was second. Sera was third. I presented for 13 minutes. Chronologically. Student work first, the mark in its earliest form, barely resolved, working towards something it would not fully become for another 2 years. Then 4 years of the ratio tightening, the logic clarifying, the approach becoming something consistent and traceable. Then the Harmon Project. Then 3 years of everything after it. The line of development sitting in the room for anyone who wanted to follow it. I did not point to the mark. I did not mention Sera's name. I let the work sit on the screen and do what work does when it is allowed to speak. When I finished, Calloway said,
How long have you been working with that compositional element? The triangular negative space.
"Since my 2nd year of school. I have process documentation going back 9 years if it would be useful context for the evaluation."
It may be useful, yes.
I sat down in the 2nd row. Penn was in the back corner, exactly where I had asked him to be. Sera walked in for the 3rd slot with the triptych on slide 2. She was good at rooms. That had always been true. She moved through the opening of the presentation with ease, with the particular fluency of someone who has rehearsed until the performance becomes invisible. And for a moment, I felt the old thing, the reflex of watching her work and finding it impressive before I remembered what it was built on. Then Torres, one of the brand representatives, leaned forward with his pen tapping the edge of the table.
This compositional approach, we saw something very similar in the earlier slot. Is this a shared influence, or?
It's my approach. It's been central to my practice for several years.
Calloway looked up from her notes. She looked at Sera, then she looked at me, sitting in the 2nd row, in that specific order, and the look said, "I see exactly what is happening here."
Do you have earlier work that shows this developing? Before the Harmon Project? The previous presenter had 9 years of process documentation.
The room went quiet. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way rooms go quiet when 12 people stop performing and start paying attention. Sera opened her mouth. There was no earlier work. There was no earlier work because the work was mine, and mine had started 9 years ago in a sublet studio, in a building that had since been converted to condos, documented in journals she had never opened, time-stamped in files she had never touched. She had the scans. She had never had the origin.
I don't have that material with me today.
We'll need it for the evaluation. That's going to be the comparison point.
Torres said quietly to the person beside him, the legal advisor, not trying to be subtle anymore. That's the same mark. Penn in the back of the room said nothing. He had done the only thing I needed him to do. He was present. He had witnessed. He would be a name attached to a memory, if it ever came to that. And Sera did not know he was there. Calloway set her pen down on the closed notebook. The room had already decided. I could feel it, that particular shift in the air when 12 people stop evaluating and arrive at the same conclusion from different directions simultaneously. Sera was still at the front of the room when I stood, picked up my portfolio case, and walked toward the door. She said my name. Once. That flat, particular tone she had used my entire adult life when she needed something from me and could feel me not giving it. I stopped. I turned. You borrowed the work. I let you. That's the last time. I walked out. I did not take the contract. It had been built around the wrong name from the first slide, and I did not want to spend the next year of my practice explaining that to rooms full of people who would always wonder what they had missed. I told Calloway I was open to future work on my own terms, when the foundation was right and the timing was clean. She said she understood. She said it the way people say things when they mean it and are choosing their words because they want them to be remembered correctly. 6 weeks later, Aldrin called directly. No pitch, no intermediary, no room full of competitors. A direct line, a conversation, a scope of work where my name was in the brief from the first sentence, not as a reference source, but as the reason they were calling. I negotiated the rate myself. I set the timeline. I chose the work I wanted to make. Sera's portfolio went quiet after that Thursday. Not with any particular crash. Quietly, the way a thing loses volume when the source of it is gone. The commissions she had been building toward didn't arrive. The relationships she had leveraged with the work stopped holding weight without the work behind them. I heard about it later from Penn, who had stayed in touch in the easy, low-stakes way of people who are glad they did the right thing. I did not ask for details. There was nothing left for me in the details. I was 3 projects into the next thing by then, all of it mine, all of it with my name in it from the first line. The mark in the corner was just the proof, and the proof had only ever needed one room, one wall with the work displayed in sequence, and one person to ask the right question out loud. She had given me the room. I had given her 11 years to understand what she was looking at. She never did.